Hey, my friends, welcome back to the show. Now, this one I feel is truly a gift. After having several guests on the show that have dealt with trauma and spoke to how they overcame that and used that pain and turned it into power, I sought out Miranda Barrett, our guest today, and she works specifically with clients that have overcome trauma. And she's going to walk us through some amazing techniques, some conversations that I never foresaw us having, but I feel that she's able to enlighten us with focus on energy and consciousness and just so many different things that we talk about in this show that I don't want to hold us back from it anymore. So let's get on with the show, and I know you're going to take away a lot.
All right, Miranda, welcome to the show.
Hi.
All right, so just kind of want to hear a little bit of background, maybe how you've gotten to where you're at and the people that you work with and what you do specifically.
So it's been a long journey getting to where I am today. At this point, I have the luxury of feeling really comfortable and loving the work I do. And the best way I can put it, it's been like a tapestry. There are things that I've explored and done over the years that at the time I had no idea why I was doing it. And then years later, I'm like, oh, that's a piece of the equation. And I would have to say it's like through my own personal experience, I came in as a person who's just really curious. And anybody who knows me well, if they had to give me one value, they would say the truth is what is most important to me. So everything in my life has pointed to that, which is, one of the biggest, hardest questions to answer, because the older I get, the less I know what is true, which is a humbling and actually rather hilarious situation to be in, that the more you think you know, the less you know.
So spot on, though.
Yeah. So again, when I'm working with people, people have asked me for years what I do. And, when I was designing my website, 5 years ago, I'm like, it's so hard to distill down something that has been morphed over 20, 30 years. But the best way I can put it is when I meet with people, I'm looking for their original blueprint, and I'm looking for the essence of their being that is really authentic and is like in alignment with who they are. And then I ask them to tell the story. I don't need a lot of details. But in that, I get to see where their truth and their story have no alignment. And I can't tell you how I do it. I've had many people ask me to train them, and I'm like, I don't know how to train you. All I can say is keep finding your truth and your blueprint and be an expression of that. But in that, I can then distill down to what the original authentic nature is and keep pointing back to that and keep finding doorways and roads back to that. And I know part of your journey is being interested in trauma and how that impacts people, and how I always look at it is you have like an original shaft of energy that you live in that's authentic to your nature, to your values, to your sense of humor, to all parts of yourself, human and spiritual. And then something happens, an experience that pulls you off that center. And it's kind of like a tree that has to grow at a strange angle to get to the light. And in that, then we identify with a wound. We identify with a story that got sort of mocked up around that experience. And then that becomes a new identity. And in my own life and in the work I do, what I'm always looking at is how to sort of unpack that glacier that's sort of holding the essence of someone out of place.
It's beautiful. So, yeah, like you said, I'm interested in trauma. And the reason we've had a couple of guests who have been on the show and have just explained how they had used weight as a shield or as a mask or as a way to, like you said, create that new identity to kind of hide and protect themselves. And it wasn't until they, like you say, unpacked the glacier, realized that that's what they were even doing, and then begin a process of healing and taking power back over the situation and learning to sit within it, was the way that someone had described it who had been through it. It wasn't that she was trying to fight it anymore or hide from it anymore or even work through it, but just to be able to sit with it. And it was because of that the weight was able to be released. And it wasn't even a weight loss journey at that point. It was just the weight was able to be released that was tied to that. So what are your thoughts and stuff if someone is, thinking back and dealing with a traumatic experience that they may be recognizing, yeah, that's me, and that there's stuff there as to, why I am holding on to this belief or this story. Where does one even begin with that?
That's a good question. The foundation I always work from is that whatever it is that you're meeting has to be met with love and compassion. And because most of the things that cause discomfort in us as human beings, we resist, we push against. And as soon as we resist it, there's two forces working together, which is then holding it actually in place. And I think you said it beautifully. There's sort of a surrender of the reality. Negotiating with reality, we never win. It doesn't matter which way up or down we do it. Reality ultimately will win. And whether it's a trauma that's really, resulting in addiction or weight gain or unhealthy relationships or debt, it manifests in so many different areas. And so the first bit is, I always believe that if you bring awareness to something, it shifts it. The image I always use is like, the iceberg. It's like the tip of the iceberg that you see above the ocean is the conscious mind. And that has a lot of thoughts and is happy to, say, yes, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to be this and the other. But the unconscious mind is the mass of ice that the ship never sees. And that's what rules us. It's our unconscious thought patterns that rule us, and our wounds, in my humble opinion, are embedded in that. So you can have a belief, I want to be slim, I want to be in a healthy relationship, I want to be successful. But if the unconscious mind, if it's in conflict with that, the unconscious mind will win. So there's a level of bringing the unconscious to the conscious, which I think is why therapy is helpful. Journaling, I'm a big believer in using silence as a remedy, like going deep into stillness and silence, because that's where the truth lies, because we're not all involved in our senses. So first of all, bring it to awareness, and then just leaning into it, softening into what that reality is, because everything we do in life, there's a reason we do it. Even if it looks on the outside to be so potentially harmful, there's something underneath that some belief is trying to serve you. Like whether it's weight, it's a protective mechanism, or it's not wanting to be vulnerable, or it's wanting to keep isolated, or, it could be so many things, so many reasons, but it's trying to serve you. And you know what it's like. When someone thanks you for something, there's like a, okay, I did my job. You can let down some of the pressure and the push as soon as you're thanked. So I actually think gratitude is one of the most deep spiritual practices we can have. So I think it's softening to it. I think it's acknowledging what it is and then going into conversation with it. And one of the questions I often ask with clients is, when you're in that space, how old do you feel? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say younger than today. And then that, they don't usually feel like a grown-up, man or woman. They're like, well, I feel about 5.
Love it.
I have that. I know when I'm really upset, if I'm PMSing or something like that, I don't feel like a 50-year-old woman. I feel about 20 or 30 or even 10 sometimes. So there's that level of acknowledging, and then it's kind of what you shared earlier. It's going back to the root of when did that wound first get exposed? And a lot of times people do triage on it, but they don't heal it.
So then what's the difference between doing triage on it and healing it? I know the piece that you brought up, which has been something in every single interview that I've ever had, the bringing awareness is such a key piece. Every person has talked about it. So we know that clearly is giving somebody the full spectrum and removing the lens with which they're seeing so that they can begin to do that work. And I was just paying key attention to the language that you mentioned with the, I want to be thin, or I want that conscious level thinking of the knowing before shifting to the doing, or even eventually that level of being within it, where you're wrestling with the beliefs that are controlling that unconscious level. So how do you shift between those two levels so that you actually are doing the work? Like, where does that begin for most people?
You mean bringing it to awareness?
Yeah. I think that can be a hard thing to be.
To
think you're aware, but how do you even bring light to something that you were unaware is an issue?
I think the first bit is knowing that we don't know something, which is humbling in its own nature, but it's kind of like realizing there's something you're bumping up against that is causing either pain in your own life or in relationships or in your career. So I think the first part is just simply sort of acknowledging that there's something going on. And then I think it's finding the right mirror for you. So for some people that might be therapy. For me, I go on silent retreat twice a year with my teacher, and it's like a full-on therapy session for about, between 5 and 10 days, depending, because that's when I meet myself. There's no distractions. For other people, that would be hell on earth. They would be like, no, I don't want to do that. So it's finding the right mirror. For some people, I know exercise can be a way to meet your boundaries. When I work with my trainer, and if he pushes me too far, this teenager comes out of me that's just a bitch. She's horrible. And I apologize to him on a regular basis. I'm like, you just bring this out of me, because he's pushing something in my body that I wouldn't push myself. I know, like, my brother, he races motorbikes. That's how he meets God. We all have our ways. So I think it's, first of all, it's acknowledging, I need some guidance. I need some help. I need a mirror to look into that will actually reflect back a truth. Mm-hmm. And then committing to it, having faith in that, because sometimes things can get worse before they get better. We're very good at human beings at going numb and living in denial. We are well programmed for it. So when you start digging around in the dirt and uprooting things, it can be bumpy. And that's why I think having a support system, and it sounds like the work you do for people, you create a safe space that they can actually reveal the truth of who they are. Because no one will reveal their inner vulnerable being if they don't feel safe. And most wounds and traumas come from not feeling safe.
So beautifully said. So beautifully said. So what I'm hearing is, once you're able to bring awareness to it, it's also on this other side of having appreciation for it with wherever it's at. Is that, we use the word gratitude, but is that where you're going with that and what you feel?
Yeah, because the part of us, even if it's a hugely dysfunctional behavior, there's a reason we brought it in. It was either taught to us or it was an absolute survival mechanism. And if you think about anyone, any drug addict or anything like that, they're desperately trying not to feel something. It's their own poison that they're trying not to feel. So by being grateful to something that maybe has served us up to a certain point, the gratitude takes away, because to me, gratitude is what I call a human spiritual quality value. It's a higher value. It's not really of the human animal. Human animal is not generous or grateful. It's more survival and, how do I get what I need and want?
Sure.
So gratitude is a higher value. It's a higher quality. And one of my mentors said this beautifully years ago to me. He said, what serves you in the first half of your life might destroy you in the second. And wherever that half life is, that, that's nebulous. But there's the part of what served us in our childhood or our teenage years or building a career or forming a family. We probably were very there was ambition in there was drive, there was fear, there was, oxytocin and sexual hormones. There's all sorts of things that got in the mix of that. At some point, we have to recalibrate to see how conscious were those choices. And then at some point, to me, it's the maturing of the ego. It's the maturing of the psyche to realize, okay, that behavior, which is unconscious and just like a daily loop, it worked until it started causing some, it's like hitting your head up against something. It started causing some other pain. And then we have to look to see how to unravel it. But we need to thank it. It's probably served us for years. Because a wound isn't a comfortable place to be. None of us like to be wounded. None of us like to feel stitched up and triaged. And so that part of the psyche that was really traumatized, it's had to sort of pull up its bootstraps and show up on the front line like a child soldier.
Yeah. So it may have been a protective mechanism. It may have served us extremely well.
Yeah.
And then later on in life, new levels, new devils, right? So it could become a survival technique. And we're utilizing it to what we believe unconsciously is serving us from a positive nature. And the brain is trying to keep us safe and survive, but yet it could be doing us more damage from a completely different viewpoint. If we're now on top of a mountain needing to get down into a valley and all we've ever known is climbing, we don't have the skill set to get down.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful analogy for it. Or that it might be that you just need to hang out on the plateau and enjoy the view. Imagine that.
Goes back to the gratitude and appreciation. Can you tell I'm an entrepreneur? And it's
exactly, but there must be another mountain.
It's also my MO to climb big mountains. I do.
Yeah, and you're in a phase of building, which is is a wonderful phase. But we also have to pause. Because that's the overview, that's the centurion energy that can kind of look over things and see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But it's meeting the self with a tenderness. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is a Rumi quote that says the first love affair is always with the self. And imagine if people lived by that their commitment was to themselves. They became their biggest advocate. They became the person who was always behind their back and felt like they had themselves. Because we spend most of our life abandoning ourselves and betraying ourselves. I'm not going to talk from being a woman, but I know as a woman, we are programmed to do that. One of the retreats that I lead, it's called A Woman's Truth, and it's 12 elements to it. And basically it takes us going through all our basic needs to the premise that you have needs. Those needs, it's vital that you take care of them. You need to communicate them. And then once your well is full, you have something to give to be of service in the world. Most people are just hemorrhaging drops of blood. Going, I got this left. It's like, oh my God. Yeah.
No, it's so true. I like to use the analogy of the heart is what pumps blood to every little thing in the body and what keeps it going. And yet we know that the heart actually utilizes its most pure oxygenated blood for itself. And we don't consider the heart selfish for sparing itself, because if the heart goes, this little monkey brain up here isn't going to let us have all these wonderful crazinesses. So it's kind of the same thing. We have to be our own beating heart before we bleed out everything else to everyone else. And
I think, it's such a good point. And I think then there's different types of people. There's people like, I can tell, like you, who would absolutely bleed out your heart for somebody. There's also people out there who are extraordinarily selfish. Whether that's their true nature or that's a wound is, could be either, but they will they will find someone like you and drain you dry. So there always has to be this balance of coming back to kind of your own center, your own home base, and filling that back up.
That makes sense. And so you were talking about energy earlier, and just going down this pattern here. And do you think there's a mix or a balance of masculine versus feminine energy when it comes to, getting in touch with the self, but then also utilizing your pain or your ego for fighting these battles or protecting yourself from, like you said, someone that may be more on that continuum to bleed you dry. How does energy play into all of this?
Oh, that's a big question.
And maybe a vague one. I'm sorry, but you just you struck some major interest.
I'm just trying to get a sense of which doorway to go through. I think as human beings, we're energy beings, and there's a neutrality to that, whether you're masculine or feminine. I think there's then our character and our personalities, and then our experience that molds us. And one of the things that I've noticed is there's certain people who I call very fluid, like their energy moves, and then there's people who are very structured. And the people who are very fluid will kind of navigate the terrains but won't hold anything really, really strongly. And the people who are very firm, they have a lot of opinions, they usually have a lot of political opinions. So there's different characters and there's personalities. And then there's people who give, there's people who take. So I'm generalizing a lot here. And then there is the element of the masculine, the feminine, again, massive generalization, but on the whole, men tend to have a stronger relationship with their needs. Like if you need to pee, you usually just go pee. We're weird as women. We drive around with our car empty of gas, starving, hungry, needing to pee, and then wondering why we're in a really bad mood. Oh, we'll do it all later, And I think we're just programmed to self-sacrifice. I mean, otherwise the human species probably wouldn't do so well, in keeping them
so well said.
Alive and what have you. So I think
I feel like I need to just go give my wife a big hug I
think that'd be an excellent idea. Yes.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah.
No. I think yes, all young mothers deserve a huge hug. So I think there's the human element. I think the energetic realm, it's a harder one to navigate. Like we do know when we're hungry. There's a biological response. We know when we're stressed, if we're in touch with ourselves, because again, there's a physicality to how it feels. Energetically, for people who are sensitive to it, like for me, if I walk into a room and the energy is bad, I literally feel slimed, like how a dog wants to shake up. I'm like, oh, and I either walk out if I can, or I'll start clearing the room because it's just who I am. I'm very sensitive to energy. So it depends if you're sensitive to that or not. But what happens is the bottom line is we are infinite energy. We are all connected. But we're only connected to that truth when we're in our spiritual nature. Our human nature believes we're all separate. So I don't know if I'm answering your question at all.
You're going on a path that I'm interested in.
Okay. So in my experience, if I take care of my physical body well, then the container that my energy moves through is more stable. And I can align with the values that are true to me. That comes back to what I said in the beginning about your original blueprint. I believe everybody comes in with a set of values that if we're aligned with our truth, we will follow. And they're different for everybody. I know a lot of people who the value of truth, which is my highest value, be like, that's not mine, mine's freedom, or, something completely different. So when we take care of the physical body, we make the container stabilized, which is all part of the nervous system. And instead of living in the sympathetic nervous system, which is, fight, flight, or freeze, we live more in the parasympathetic, which just our ability and capacities really expand. So if we take care of the physical, drop into the stress part of the nervous system because we're human beings and we drive cars and we have bank accounts and things like that, but keep, whether it's through meditating, breathing practices, therapy, nature, whatever it is, we come back to our center. When we're in the parasympathetic, our ability to connect to the energetic realm is much deeper and wider. And that's why, they've done research why prayer works and why meditating works on blood pressure and all of these things. It actually takes the stress levels down. And when we're stressed, we're like squirrels on steroids. We just are. We don't care about anybody else. We feel either we have to fight something or run from it or freeze and pretend we're dead like a possum. I mean, we have all these mechanisms. But when we're out of that, then our capacity to go into the higher realms expands. And to me, that's when the energetic realm opens up. And there's a capacity to get to know kind of who we are when we're not in fear or in scarcity. But the bottom line is we're all energy the whole time. So whichever side we're in. Yeah.
So it's just harnessing and utilizing that energy to really set the stage for the environment that we want to be in, whether it be a physical, actual environment or shifting into more of a spiritual or mental environment that we need in order for that place of being at that time.
Yeah, and every situation demands something different. Mm-hmm. Like in the middle of the night when your little one is screaming its head off and you're both exhausted, you're not going to go in there and do a breathing exercise. You're going to go in and change his nappy, his diaper, and or whatever. You're going to take care of him. So, it's what part of us should be showing up that's appropriate. And that, to pull this back into sort of trauma and wounding, when we're caught in a wound or a trauma, we won't think straight. As soon as something happens that the trauma is re-triggered, we'll go back into the anxious part of the nervous system and we'll respond from that, which is all the reptilian brain where there's no cognitive reasoning, there's no memory, there's no intelligence, there's no intuition. It's literally, how do I survive this situation? And so we just don't have as much capacity. So it's when we drop into the really stressful part, the nervous system, it's finding ways to come back out and to get back at this level where, the nervous system is online, the immune system is online, everything is tracking, because the body is a miracle. I'm absolutely in awe of it, because right now, billions of things are happening in us just to keep it going. So I can sit here and talk to you and, be upright and have a kind of conversation.
It's pretty amazing. I love that you practice even what you're sharing by just speaking right now. You're in awe as a way that you're showing your body gratitude and appreciation for all that it can do, and that like you're aware of it and you're showing the appreciation. So I love that you truly embody what you're saying, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So what do you think offers kind of the biggest impact for someone who is ready to make a shift into a new, maybe someone who has trauma, but what other than bringing awareness to it and finding that mirror, what else do they kind of need to hear right now? What would help?
It's finding their language so they can start to open up doorways to love themselves. And that can show up in so many different ways, but it's like making a commitment to the part of you that like in every day it's like having two places we can invest in. We can invest in a choice that will nurture us and make us feel better, or we can invest in a choice that will harm us. If you think of everything in life, it sort of comes down to one or the other.
True.
You can go to bed and get your 8 hours sleep, which would be nurturing, or you can stay up and watch the news and really traumatize yourself. And then, and then there will be a consequence to either one of those. I mean, you're a dad, you understand this whole consequence. You'll be learning more, I promise you, where it's just, cause and effect. So it's really seeing, there's a beautiful old story about this, and it's like the question is, which wolf do you feed? Mm-hmm. Do you feed the wolf of misery, or do you feed the wolf of joy? That's a choice in every moment. In our conscious mind, when we're feeling healthy, it makes sense. Well, I will choose to invest in the part that will make me feel good. But if the wound has a story wrapped around it that you don't deserve, you're not worthy, people will always let you down and betray you, whatever the storyline is, that will, like I said, the unconscious mind will take you down every time.
Mm-hmm.
And you will then choose behaviors that will actually make the story self-prophesying, to make it true. And it's, you know, and I've done this work for many years, it's extraordinarily powerful, that unconscious wounded loop. And we are creatures of habit, human beings. Oh, dear Lord, we just are so habitual.
Yeah.
It's so familiar. And even if the familiar is horrendously traumatizing, we go back to it. So there has to be a level of kind of like the foundation, like the tapestry has to have a level of some sort of self-worth and self-love that can sort of be the cradle that holds the desire to do any internal work. Because, you know, it takes time, money, and energy. It's an investment.
Yeah.
And if the wound says you are worthless, why would you invest in yourself? So again, so much has to be sort of unpacked and untangled. You know, it's a journey, but I think having just love and compassion for the journey. And the other thing I always say that, you know, there's a part of you that, you know, has a judgment around something. And then I'm like, well, what if you sent love and gratitude to that part that's trying to protect you? It's like, okay. And then it's like, okay, so the part that's judging you, having compassion for the part that judged you, why don't you back up another step and have some compassion for that part? And you just keep backing up until eventually you get to a place where nobody's judging anything. Because our human nature is to judge. We have to. Otherwise, everyone would be driving through red lights, you know, be clear.
Right.
But how do you keep backing up to the place? And that's why, to me, silence, nature, meditating, anything that kind of connects us to that part that isn't terrified of death, terrified of illness, terrified of poverty. We have to find that part that exists beyond our body, beyond our mind, beyond our thoughts, beyond this experience. You know, there's a part of us that when we die, the energy carries on. We have no idea into what, but we are part of an infinite ball of energy.
Energy cannot be created nor destroyed, right?
No, it just is. It just is. And what I love is there's, once you start doing the more internal work, you get to a place where you can touch on it sometimes. It's so beautiful, where it just doesn't have an agenda. It just doesn't have a storyline. It's not tied in knots. And there's such a freedom to that. And so if you know that exists, you can kind of use that as the bird's eye view to look down and go, okay. And then there's this poor human who's running around really upset. And so you sort of pet it like a cat, like, oh, sweet, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. So really learning to step outside of yourself and appreciate the journey that yourself is going through as you look upon yourself. And I love that you touched on the different forms of finding that, whether it's, you know, getting outdoors and being in nature and meditation and just the different capacities that it's unique for each individual within themselves. And so like when I've worked with people who really have those stories that are just running strong and, you know, different things to learn to let them go. But if listeners could take away one thing to start changing that story, to start loving themselves, because it's easy to say, love yourself. And someone's going, I don't even know how to do that. Right. And, you know, is it conscious self-creation? Is it like these type of statements that we repeat and embody? Is it expressing gratitude and love so that eventually we start to internalize and feel that ourselves? Like what is it that is one kind of thing that they could start with?
I mean, I think all of those are profound, apart from affirmations, which I have absolutely no respect for. Absolutely. I think they're Band-Aids on gaping wounds. I think it's finding, because most people's trauma comes from not feeling safe and feeling they are not worthy or they don't belong. I mean, I'm generalizing, but it would be one of those. So to find an arena, whether it's, you know, some people it's a 12-step program, some people it's therapy, so, you know, there's so many different choices. that you find something that resonates with you, that when you walk into that space, your nervous system goes and just lets down. People are funny when they come to my space, they say they walk up the drive and they feel better. Well, that's good. I didn't even have to do much.
You're like, great, I'll start charging the moment you're driving up. No,
no, exactly. I know. Yes. And then bye-bye, see ya. But they know that they're coming to a place that's safe. And it's finding that, I'm going to come back to using the term mirror. It's finding that mirror and that container that the protective barriers can come down, and there's an element of vulnerability that can be exposed, because unless you start digging around in the dirt, you're not going to find kind of the trapdoor that got bolted and shut down, in childhood. And then I'm a big believer that, things get passed on through the ancestral line. So sometimes we're carrying stuff that has nothing to do with us. It's the trauma from our parents or grandparents.
Yeah.
And that. One of the things, my teacher, Adyashanti, he says that, we're worthy simply because we exist.
It is pretty amazing to think of all the things that had to happen and how we happen to be, the one little combination of sperm and eggs, to make us as a human being. And we definitely are worthy to exist. And I kind of look at the entire human race as this beautiful orchestra. And it's not that the symbol has more power than the triangle, and it doesn't matter what your story is and what needs to be. It all needs to be in order to create this beautiful masterpiece, no matter how small your role is. And sometimes the beauty of the orchestra is not in the music, but in the silence and the pauses. And I think some of us even play those roles. So sorry to go off on a little tangent, but what you said.
No, it's perfect, because if you think of it like a leaf on a tree doesn't question whether it's worthy. It's simply a leaf on a tree that grew. One day it might fall off unless it's an evergreen. Then it'll become compost. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't question it. We're the only thing on this earth that questions whether, am I worthy? It's like we exist, that's enough. But that premise, imagine if that premise could sort of filter into people's lack of worth, or the story they've been told, or the experiences they've had. That could be the sort of the cradle that holds it. Because without a feeling of worth, we won't really choose a direction that would be helpful. Because a lack of worth, we've all felt it. When you feel shamed, or you've done something wrong, or, everything inside just sort of curls up and just, gets crumpled.
Yeah.
So we have to find our own personal, way to do that. What I always think inquiry, asking questions, is really what leads to the answer. The answer is in the question. And when we ask a question, we're actually expanding our capacity to saying, actually, I don't know the answer. Maybe there's something to look at. So even asking the question, do I need help here? It would be a good question. And in the truth of the moment, you'll probably hear a quiet yes. Intuition doesn't shout, it whispers, but yes.
Until we don't listen for long enough, and then it finds ways to get a little louder, though, doesn't it?
Well, and that's an interesting piece, just, to talk about something like weight. To me, intuitive guidance knocks on the door in a whisper. We ignore it. And then it'll knock, kind of knock on our spiritual door. Then it'll knock on our mental, emotional door, with repetitious thoughts or stressful thoughts. And we'll tend to ignore that. We'll drink a beer and smoke a cigarette over it.
We'll sedate in some way, won't we?
Yeah. Well, media, I think technology is our new drug, to be honest with you. I think it's
I agree.
A problem. But when it hits the physical body is when we pay attention. We tend to not ignore a physical ailment. If it's pain, weight gain, acne, whatever it is, we will pay attention to it when it hits physically. But the trouble is it's already gone through 4 layers to get there. So by that point, it's really dense and it's much harder to turn around. Whereas if we listen to, that's why something like meditating is good, because you're giving a space where your senses are shut down, and maybe you can listen on a more spiritual level or a mental level or an emotional level. That's why I think PMS is genius, because I think the truth is expressed during PMS and menopause, it seems. You don't hold back. You know, there's a truth of the raw nature of the emotion. And if we were more in touch with that, it wouldn't have to build into these sort of physical ailments so much. And that I mean, that's just my sense of it.
No, that's so powerful. It's on that fourth level almost, that it's gotten to that. And it's just it's a wake up call that is there. So, and that's probably where it's touching on the deeper levels, because it's become surface. Then it's also become unconsciously on the deepest levels of guilt and shame on that level. So the polar opposites to finally reach that screaming point. So,
yeah. And just one more, just because you mentioned the word shame, most people, if they're not getting the help they need, there's usually a huge blanket of shame shrouding it. And shame thrives in secrecy. So the minute you find a safe space to talk about something and share something, that it's witnessed and not judged, the shame literally, I mean, I've seen this thousands of times, the shame literally just shrivels. And then something else rises out. And, you know, guilt, you can handle guilt. Guilt just means you're not a sociopath. You know, it's like, that's fine. Shame, it's like a crucifixion. It's awful.
Oftentimes, I think we see it actually become a crucifixion. That's when people can't handle those things anymore.
Yeah.
And on the nutrition and kind of sabotage level, I see it all the time where, you know, someone will eat something that they don't feel is adequate. And that's why I try and disassociate the good and the bad. And it's about, you know, finding where you're at and what works for you, and understanding that it's all habitual and it's all okay. And it's all just forms of energy. But when people tend to do that, then if guilt or shame becomes an emotion that they attach with eating that as if they are bad, I almost always see, and this is where I try and help bring awareness, and just curious what your thoughts are, but I see that they're trying then, probably on a unconscious level, to help themselves. They're trying to make themselves feel good and flood themselves with dopamine because they feel so low. So the only way that the patterns know how to do that is to then eat something like ice cream that then gives them that immediate dopamine release, but then it takes them right back deeper into the shame. And that's where these binge eating weekends or weeks or months seem to flow. And so what I've been trying to help is just bring awareness to, I ate this. It doesn't make me bad. It's just what I ate, and it was enjoyable and I appreciate it. And then bringing light to the fact that, you know what, I appreciate myself for only eating this. And this is where I can stop and sit and I can be okay with it. Because me 2 months ago would have then had an entire week of this. And so there's no shame or guilt tied with eating that, but appreciating the fact that that's where we stopped. And just curious on your intake.
Yes, because I mean, really, you know, what you just laid out is that you have a situation where you feel I'm going to use your example, you need food to increase serotonin or do something to make you feel better. There's a reason that you needed that in the first place. So then you eat whatever you eat, and then the old pattern is then you beat yourself up for it. So you had the original upset, you then ate on top of it, or took a drug or did whatever it was you chose to do. And then on top of that, you're then judging and self-loathing and hating yourself. So basically you've got this horrendous fix that how can you get out from under that?
Yeah.
So there's that part that you said it so beautifully. It's like, okay, right now I am eating a pint of ice cream. The question to ask is, okay, what am I needing? Because you're not really needing a pint of ice cream unless you're pregnant and your body needs calcium. What pregnant women eat. But
man, I must be pregnant quite often.
Yes, you must be needing calcium for something. There's a level of going, okay, what is it that's needed? And if you can pause, just become the witness, just for a moment, to ask that question, to go, okay, I feel ... lonely, upset, stressed, overwhelmed, whatever the feeling is, just to name it, which is the awareness, and then to go, okay, so what do I really need? In that moment, it won't be a pint of ice cream. The pint of ice cream is the Band-Aid on the wound. It'll either be a hug, it'll be sunshine and nature, it'll be to move off the couch, to actually get the body moving again. It'll be something relatively simple, because the remedies for the human body and the human mind are relatively simple. It's not that complicated. So the question comes from the observer or the witness, who can oversee the situation and go, "Ooh, there's pain happening." Naming it, owning it, and then asking, what is it that I really need? And then if you can get that, like reaching out to someone, just texting someone, can you talk for a minute? It can be such a simple thing.
It's beautiful. I love the acronym that I use for that is HALT. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? and then from there, the text message is just that pain shared is pain divided. So at least we're getting there. So.
No, I mean, you got some beautiful terminology for it, but it's the pause and the momentum of the unconscious loop. And the unconscious loop then just keeps adding more and more, to the bomb that's going to go off eventually.
Stop the bomb. Beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So we're running short on time, but before I ask my last question, where is it that people can find you, or any resources that you may have, or anything if they wanted to reach out in some capacity?
Sure. Probably the easiest way, my website is Miranda J. Barrett, MirandaJBarrett.com. And probably, and they can just send me an email through there, and it has a lot of information of the work I do. I'm based in Southern California, but I have clients all over the world, so that I try not to make that a problem. And yes, no, if something I said resonates, that's wonderful. I hope it's been of service.
Yeah, greatly appreciate it. We'll link your website in the show notes for everybody as well. So much appreciated. So my last question, and you can take this any direction that you see fit and feel, but what do you believe it means and takes to truly transform?
I would say love. I would say that there has to be a dedication and a commitment to finding that well of love that's in all of us, and to let that flow. Because I think if we love ourselves, and I'm not talking about in a narcissistic way, I'm talking about in a wholesome, healthy way, that we're okay to pay attention to our own being, then we're not codependent, we're not self-sabotaging, we're not self-harming. Somebody asked me this recently, and I said, basically, I live by two mottos. My boss is spirit. That's who I listen to. That's who I answer to. And I'll boil everything back down to love eventually.
Beautiful.
I think it's purest. I got a heart-shaped birthmark on my cheek. I'm like, well, I came in with that, it seemed. So, but I think that if we can get back into a relationship of love of the self, then everything from there will kind of unfold in its way. And there's so many, that's why I don't like affirmations, because just because you're following your course, just because you're being of service, doesn't necessarily mean everything's going to be wonderful. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be healthy. Doesn't mean you're going to be rich, but it means you're aligned with your values. And the only way to really know what we value is if we've dismantled enough of the things that are in the way of our true nature. So whatever brings us back to that sort of the essence of our own being, and love, in my opinion, is the piece. I mean, you know this. I mean, isn't being a father, hasn't it just taught you what unconditional love is in a way that just broke your heart into 1,000 billion pieces? And you're like, okay, this is what we got. And your heart is walking around outside of you every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So whatever it takes, some of it is, sometimes it's having a child, but I mean, you can do your own, own birthing of that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So bringing awareness as much as possible, continuing to surrender along the journey, finding the mirror that we need for where we're at in life, and then eventually doing everything in our power to get to a place of loving the self.
Yeah. Nicely put, yes.
I tried to listen. It took away a lot.
Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you again so much for coming on the show, Miranda. So enlightening and beyond helpful.
I'm so glad, and hopefully our paths will cross in person one day.
Well, there you have it. I told you it was going to be a good one, and I'm sure your head is spinning just as much as mine is. There's so much value in that, and I just love that takeaway of love. And I actually wrote about that almost 2 years ago, just feeling that most people's transformations truly happen when they reach this level of mastery, when they feel like, I can do this, I can tap into this. It's really just coming from a place of love. And it's almost the transition from the opposite of fear, the opposite of pain. It has to be met with love in order for us to get to that place, in order for us to truly transform. So I just found it extremely refreshing that someone has such a deep insight, awareness, and just a true love of helping people to that level. So I'm so glad we had her as a guest on our show. And if you're liking this and finding that people like this are bringing you value, and this is what you want to hear more of, do me a favor, screenshot your podcast player and tag me on social media so that I'm aware of what it is that you're looking to hear, what you're looking to learn, and how I can best continue to serve you. So as always, my friends, Coach Joseph Hawthorne, peace be the journey.